You know those days when the universe decides to personally ruin your life? Yeah, that was Tuesday for Jake Martinez. First, his alarm clock decided to take a permanent vacation, making him 2 hours late to his thrilling minimum wage job at Pete's Exotic Pets. Then his car wouldn't start because apparently even mechanical objects were conspiring against him. By the time he jogged the 3 miles to work, sweaty and apologetic, his boss Pete was already sharpening his metaphorical firing sword. "Martinez, you're late again," Pete growled, not looking up from his newspaper. The man had the personality of a wet cardboard box and the compassion of a tax collector. "Sorry, Pete, my car. Don't care. Clean the reptile tanks. And don't overfeed the iguanas like last time." Here's the thing about Jake, he actually cared about animals, which, working for Pete, was basically a character flaw. Jake had been quietly giving the malnourished creatures proper portions and decent living conditions, because apparently he was the only one who'd read the care instructions. "Pete, those iguanas are underweight. The feeding chart clearly says." "The feeding chart says whatever keeps my costs down, Martinez. You're here to clean cages, not play veterinarian." "But they're suffering. Look at this python, it's got scale rot because nobody's cleaning its tank properly." Pete finally looked up, his face turning an impressive shade of red. "You know what, Martinez? You're fired. Get out, and don't expect a reference." So there Jake was, unemployed at 25, walking home through Millfield Woods because his car was still being a piece of junk, and he couldn't afford an Uber. The October air was crisp, leaves crunching under his worn sneakers as he followed the hiking trail he'd used as a shortcut since high school. That's when he heard it. A low, rumbling whimper that made his spine tingle with prehistoric fear. Every instinct screamed run, but Jake had always been cursed with curiosity and an overdeveloped sense of compassion. He pushed through a thicket of brambles and found something that definitely wasn't in any biology textbook. The creature was massive, maybe 8 feet tall, even lying down, with midnight blue scales that shimmered like oil on water. It had 6 limbs, all currently tucked against its body, and a head that looked like someone had crossed a dragon with a very sad puppy. 3 eyes, currently half closed in pain, regarded him with surprising intelligence. And it was bleeding. Green, luminescent blood oozed from a gash along its side. "Okay, universe," Jake muttered. "This is officially the weirdest Tuesday ever." The creature made that whimpering sound again, and something in Jake's chest twisted. He'd heard that sound before, from every wounded animal that had ever been brought into Pete's store. Pain was universal, apparently, even across species that shouldn't exist. "Easy there, big guy," Jake said softly, the same tone he'd used with frightened animals for years. "Let me see what's wrong." The creature's eyes tracked his movement as Jake slowly approached, hands visible and non-threatening. Years of dealing with scared animals had taught him patience. The wound looked clean but deep, like a claw mark from something even bigger. Jake pulled off his hoodie and gently pressed it against the bleeding gash. The creature flinched but didn't attack, which Jake took as a good sign. He pulled out his water bottle and his sad lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. "Sorry, it's not much," he said, breaking the sandwich in half and offering it. "But you look like you haven't eaten in a while." The creature delicately took the sandwich with what looked like a hand but had too many fingers, sniffed it carefully, then devoured it in one bite. The appreciation in those 3 eyes was unmistakable. As Jake shared his meager lunch with an alien that could probably eat him whole, he couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. "You know what, buddy? You're the first creature today that hasn't completely screwed me over. And you're not even from this planet." The creature had been making soft rumbling sounds while Jake tended to its wound, sounds that he'd assumed were just alien purring or something. He was wrong. Very, very wrong. Korthak. Jake nearly jumped out of his skin as the creature suddenly sat up, towering over him, and let out what sounded like the war cry of an angry god. Those 3 eyes were now blazing with intensity, and Jake was pretty sure he was about to become the galaxy's first human Happy Meal. Okay, I get it," Jake said, backing away slowly with his hands up. "Thanks for the snack, Time to eat the weird human. I should have seen this coming. Story of my life, really. Try to help, get eaten by alien T-Rex. But the creature wasn't advancing. Instead, it seemed to be bowing. Its massive head was lowered, and it was making those rumbling sounds again, but softer now. Gornax thik zalak thik Commander. I don't speak Klingon, buddy, Jake said nervously. If that was thank you, then you're welcome. If that was you taste like chicken, then I'd like to file a complaint. The creature, apparently named Gornax based on the guttural introduction, was definitely trying to communicate something important. It kept gesturing to itself, then to Jake, then making what might have been respectful bowing motions. Either this was an elaborate pre-dinner ritual, or Jake had accidentally stumbled into some kind of alien honor code. That's when the forest exploded. Not literally exploded, but close enough. Trees bent and snapped as something massive pushed through the canopy, and suddenly Jake was surrounded by 6 more creatures just like Gornax. Except these ones were wearing what looked like armor made from black metal and bad intentions. They saw Gornax, saw Jake standing over him with bloody hands and makeshift bandages, and immediately assumed the worst. The largest one, scarred and battle-worn, let out a roar that made Gornax's earlier outburst sound like a whisper. Korthak Empire, Devourers. Jake's brain, already running on panic and caffeine, made a series of very poor decisions in rapid succession. Instead of running, screaming, or playing dead like any sensible person would, he stepped protectively in front of Gornax. "Hey, back off," he shouted at the armored aliens. "Can't you see he's hurt? I'm trying to help him." The effect was immediate and completely unexpected. All 6 aliens stopped mid-charge and stared at Jake like he'd just performed a magic trick. Then, in perfect synchronization, they all dropped to one knee and lowered their heads. "Commander Thek Zalak," they chorused. "I'm sorry, what now?" Gornax struggled to his feet, still favoring his injured side, and launched into what sounded like rapid-fire alien explanation to his buddies. There was a lot of gesturing toward Jake, respectful rumbling, and what Jake was starting to recognize as alien body language for this tiny creature is very important. The scarred leader looked at Jake with something that might have been respect, or possibly gas. It was hard to tell with the alien facial expressions. "Human Commander Brave. Save Gornax. We serve." "No." "We serve? We serve what?" "I don't understand any of this," Jake said, his voice climbing an octave. "I just shared a sandwich and put a band-aid on a cut. That's not commander material. That's basic human decency." But apparently in alien culture, basic human decency was leadership material. Who knew? The scarred alien, who Jake was mentally nicknaming Scarface until he learned actual names, gestured toward what Jake now realized was a spaceship hidden in the forest canopy. It looked like someone had crossed a stealth bomber with a Gothic cathedral and given it anger management issues. "Commander, come. Gornax need healing. You command now." Jake looked at Gornax, who was giving him what could only be described as puppy dog eyes. All 3 of them. It was devastatingly effective. "This is insane," Jake muttered. "I got fired from a pet store this morning, and now I'm apparently an alien military commander. My mom is never going to believe this." But as he looked at Gornax's grateful expression and the respectful postures of the other aliens, Jake realized he was probably in too deep to back out now. Besides, where else was he going to go? Back to his unemployment and broken car? "Fine," he said, throwing his hands up in defeat. "But I'm telling you right now, I have no idea what I'm doing. My management experience consists of arguing with my boss about proper iguana care." The aliens seemed to find this perfectly acceptable. Apparently, Jake's standards were still higher than their previous leadership. Also, Jake added as they began walking toward the ship, "Someone needs to explain what a devourer is, because that didn't sound good when you guys were shouting about it." The silence that followed was not reassuring. The inside of the alien ship looked like someone had designed a military vessel, using heavy metal album covers as inspiration. Everything was black metal and sharp angles with lighting that suggested the interior designer had serious issues with joy. Jake was escorted through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and intimidated, which was working perfectly. So Jake said, breaking the ominous silence, "Do you guys ever consider maybe some warmer lighting? A plant or two? This place has all the charm of a haunted submarine." Scarface, who had introduced himself with a name that sounded like gargling gravel, gestured toward what was obviously the bridge. Jake walked in and immediately understood why these aliens needed help. The bridge looked like mission control for a disaster, with aliens frantically working at stations while alarms beeped ominously in the background. "Great," Jake muttered. "I'm now commanding the USS Hot Mess." A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the bridge, showing a three-dimensional map of what Jake assumed was local space. Red dots were moving systematically through a field of blue dots, and Jake didn't need a degree in alien warfare to understand that red was bad and blue was rapidly becoming extinct. "Devourers," Scarface growled, pointing at the red dots. "Eat planets. Eat everything." "They literally eat planets?" Jake asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Like the whole thing?" "Everything. Rocks, metal, life, leave nothing." "And they're heading toward—" Jake traced the trajectory with his finger and felt his stomach drop. "Earth. They're heading toward Earth. Earth next. Unless Korthak Empire stopped them." Jake stared at the display, watching the red dots continue their inexorable advance. "Okay, so let me get this straight. You're the Korthak Empire, you're losing a war against planet-eating space locusts, and you want me to fix this because I put a band-aid on Gornax?" "Gornax say human-wise. No secretive care. Teach proper feeding." Jake blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Gornax, who had been receiving medical attention from what looked like a robot designed by someone with a serious grudge against curves, hobbled over to the group. His wound was now properly bandaged, and he looked significantly better than he had in the forest. Through a combination of broken English, gestures, and what Jake was starting to recognize as alien charades, Gornax explained the situation. The Korthak Empire had been fighting the Devourers for decades, but they were losing because their military logistics were apparently managed by whoever had failed out of Space Management 101. "You mean you've been sending troops into battle without proper nutrition and rest?" Jake asked incredulously. "Of course you're losing. That's not military strategy, that's just common sense." The aliens stared at him like he'd just revealed the secret of faster-than-light travel. "And you don't coordinate your attacks? You just charge in without communication or backup plans?" More staring. "Do you even have supply lines? Medical support? Morale officers?" At this point, Jake was pretty sure the aliens thought he was some kind of strategic genius, when really he was just applying the basic principles he'd learned from years of pet care and too many war documentaries on Netflix. "Look, making sense, Elisen," Jake said, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know anything about space warfare, but I know about taking care of creatures. And armies are just collections of creatures that need food, rest, medical attention, and motivation. If you're not providing those things, you're going to lose every time." The bridge had gone completely silent. Every alien was staring at Jake with expressions that he was learning to interpret as awe mixed with "why didn't we think of that?" "Human Commander, teach us?" Scarface asked hopefully. Jake looked around the bridge, at the desperate faces of creatures who were fighting to save not just their own worlds, but his world too. He thought about Earth, about all the people who had no idea that planet-eating monsters were heading their way. He thought about his unemployed status, his broken car, and his complete lack of other options. "All right," he said finally. "I'll help. But we're doing this right. No more charging into battle on empty stomachs. No more ignoring wounded soldiers. And someone is going to explain to me exactly what we're up against." The aliens erupted in what Jake hoped were cheers of approval rather than war cries. "Also," Jake added, "I'm going to need a better title than Commander. If I'm going to save the galaxy, I want Supreme Battle Commander on my business cards. He was joking, but the aliens took him seriously. Within minutes, they were already updating their records. Jake Martinez, unemployed pet store clerk turned Supreme Battle Commander of an alien empire. His mother was definitely not going to believe this. The next few days were a crash course in interstellar military management, and Jake was starting to understand why the Korthak Empire had been losing the war. Their idea of military strategy seemed to involve throwing increasingly large numbers of soldiers at problems until either the problem went away or they ran out of soldiers. Okay, let's start with the basics, Jake said, standing in front of a group of alien officers who looked like they could bench press a small planet. When was the last time you guys ate a proper meal? The officers looked at each other with confusion. We eat when battle permits, one of them rumbled. Wrong answer. You eat on a schedule, whether battle permits or not, because hungry soldiers are dead soldiers. Next question, when do you sleep? Sleep is for the weak. Also wrong. Sleep is for the smart. Exhausted soldiers make bad decisions get people killed, and dead soldiers don't win wars. Jake had set up a whiteboard, which was apparently a revolutionary piece of technology to the Korthak Empire. He drew simple diagrams showing supply chains, rotation schedules, and basic tactical formations that any human military academy would have taught in week 1. This is your current battle strategy, Jake said, drawing a circle with arrows pointing randomly in all directions. Everyone charges at the enemy and hopes for the best. This is what we're going to do instead. He drew a more organized diagram showing coordinated attacks, fallback positions, and support structures. You coordinate your attacks. You have backup plans. You support your wounded instead of leaving them behind. And most importantly, you fight smart instead of hard. Gornax, who had become Jake's unofficial translator and closest alien friend, was taking extensive notes. His English was improving rapidly, and Jake suspected aliens were just naturally good at languages. Human Jake, very wise, Gornax rumbled approvingly. Like pack leader who cares for pack. Exactly, Jake said. I used to manage animals, and armies are just bigger, more complicated animals. You need the same basic things: food, rest, medical care, and leadership they can trust. The concept of treating soldiers as valuable resources rather than expendable cannon fodder was apparently revolutionary. Jake was starting to understand why the Devourers were winning. They were fighting a desperate, disorganized enemy that was basically defeating itself. Over the next week, Jake implemented what he grandly called the human doctrine of not being stupid. Meal schedules, sleep rotations, medical checkups, and basic team-building exercises. He introduced concepts like reconnaissance and strategic withdrawal, which the Korthak had apparently considered cowardly, but Jake preferred to call not walking into obvious traps. You know what your biggest problem is? Jake told the assembled war council. You think retreating is losing. Sometimes retreating is winning, just in a different direction. If you can't win a fight, don't fight it. Find a fight you can win instead. The aliens absorbed this wisdom like sponges. Jake was beginning to suspect that the Korthak were naturally intelligent, but had been stuck in military traditions that prioritized honor over effectiveness. They were brave, loyal, and absolutely terrible at strategy. Human commander teach flanking maneuver? Asked Admiral Thex, the scarred alien who had become Jake's unofficial second in command. Flanking maneuvers, supply line management, tactical retreats, psychological warfare. We're going to cover it all. But first, we need to talk about morale. Morale? Session. How your soldiers feel about fighting. Happy soldiers fight better than miserable soldiers. Soldiers who believe in their cause fight better than soldiers who are just following orders. Jake had discovered that the Korthak Empire had been fighting a defensive war for so long that they'd forgotten they were supposed to win it. Their entire military culture had become about dying gloriously rather than living victoriously. We're going to change that, Jake announced. Starting now, we fight to win, not to die. Dying for your cause is noble, but living for your cause is better. Gornax raised a clawed hand. Human Jake, what if we cannot win? Jake grinned. feeling more confident than he had any right to feel. Then we cheat. Humans are excellent at cheating when the stakes are high enough. The aliens looked confused, so Jake elaborated. We don't fight fair, we fight smart. We use every advantage we can get, we exploit every weakness they have, and we make them fight our kind of war, instead of theirs. As Jake looked around the room at the eager faces of aliens, who were finally learning how to fight a war instead of just participating in one, he realized something surprising. He was actually good at this. All those years of managing difficult animals, dealing with incompetent bosses, and solving problems with limited resources had prepared him for military command better than any formal training could have. "All right, people," Jake said, clapping his hands together. "Let's go save the galaxy. And remember, anyone who gets killed doing something stupid is getting written up in their personnel file." The aliens cheered. Jake was pretty sure they didn't understand sarcasm yet, but they were learning. 3 weeks later, Jake was standing on the bridge of the Korthak flagship, watching his first real space battle unfold, and trying very hard not to throw up from nerves. The Devourers had arrived in the Kepler 442 system right on schedule. A massive swarm of ships that looked like someone had crossed locusts with nightmares and given them really bad attitudes. "Okay," Jake muttered to himself, "how hard can this be? It's just pest control. Really, really big pest control. In space, with weapons that can destroy planets." "Human commander nervous?" Gornax asked, standing beside him with what Jake had learned was the alien equivalent of a concerned expression. "Terrified," Jake admitted. "But that's normal. Anyone who's not scared before their first battle is either lying or has serious brain damage." The tactical display showed the Devourer fleet advancing in a formation that Jake recognized from nature documentaries. A classic swarm pattern designed to overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers. They were big, they were numerous, and they apparently had all the tactical sophistication of angry wasps. "Admiral Thex, initiate Formation Delta 7, Jake ordered, using the tactical patterns they'd been practicing. "Formation Delta 7 confirmed," Commander Thex replied. Jake was proud of how professional the aliens had become. 3 weeks ago, their battle communications had consisted mostly of roaring and hoping for the best. The Korthak fleet spread out in a coordinated pattern that Jake had adapted from pest control strategies. Instead of meeting the Devourers head-on like they'd always done before, they were going to let the swarm come to them, then hit them from multiple angles when they were committed to the attack. "Remember," Jake announced over the fleet communications, "we're not trying to kill them all. We're trying to disrupt their coordination and force them to fight as individuals instead of as a swarm. Hunters separated from the pack are just big, confused animals." The first wave of Devourers hit the outer perimeter, and Jake watched his carefully planned formations execute exactly as they'd practiced. The aliens had learned fast, adapting human military tactics to their superior technology and natural fighting abilities. "Phase 2, go," Jake ordered. What happened next was beautiful in a terrifying, explosive way. The Korthak fleet executed a coordinated withdrawal that drew the Devourers into a carefully prepared kill zone, then hit them from 3 sides simultaneously. Ships that had been fighting as an unstoppable swarm suddenly found themselves isolated and surrounded. "It's working," Jake said, hardly believing it himself. "It's actually working." But the Devourers weren't mindless. As the battle progressed, Jake could see them adapting, trying to reform their swarm tactics. That's when he implemented what he privately called the aggressive pest control protocol. "All units, implement pattern Gamma 9. It's time to show them how humans deal with infestations." Gamma 9 was Jake's masterpiece, a tactical formation based on how professional exterminators dealt with large insect colonies. You didn't just attack the workers, you disrupted their communication, destroyed their coordination, and forced them to waste energy on individual survival instead of collective goals. The battle turned into a 3-dimensional chess game played with starships and high-energy weapons. Jake found himself thinking 10 moves ahead, predicting Devourer responses and having counter-responses ready. It was like managing a really complicated pet store, if the pets were spaceship-sized monsters and the consequences of failure were planetary extinction. Human commander, Admiral Thex reported. Enemy coordination breaking down. Individual ships fleeing battle. Jake watched the tactical display as the Devourer formation collapsed. Ships that had been part of an unstoppable swarm were now fleeing in random directions, their collective intelligence broken. Phase 3, Jake announced. Cleanup operation. Standard pursuit protocols, but don't chase them too far. Let them go back and tell their friends what happened here. The Korthak fleet moved through the battlefield with mechanical precision, finishing off damaged Devourer ships while allowing others to escape. Jake wanted survivors, wanted them to spread word the war had changed. As the last Devourer ship jumped to hyperspace, the bridge erupted in victory roars that probably violated several noise ordinances. Jake slumped in his command chair, exhausted but exhilarated. Human Commander, Gornax said proudly, "You did it. First victory against Devourers in 50 years. Jake looked at the tactical display, at the debris field where an unstoppable enemy force had been stopped by nothing more complicated than common sense and proper coordination. "You know what the funny thing is?" Jake said. "This wasn't that different from dealing with a wasp infestation. Find their patterns, disrupt their communication, force them to fight as individuals instead of a collective. Basic pest control principles." The aliens stared at him with expressions of awe mixed with confusion. "Humans compare everything to pest control?" Admiral Thex asked. Jake grinned. "Only the really important stuff." 6 months later, Jake Martinez was sitting in what used to be the United Nations building, except now it was the Galactic Defense Coordination Center, and he was fielding requests from 17 different alien civilizations who all wanted him to solve their military problems. "Let me get this straight," Jake said into the universal translator that still made everyone sound like they were gargling marbles. "The Zephyrian Empire wants me to reorganize their entire military, because they heard I once gave a lecture on proper feeding schedules?" "Correct, Supreme Battle Commander," came the enthusiastic reply from what looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a very formal businessman. Zephyrian warriors much improved after implementing meal times. Jake rubbed his temples. The fame he had discovered was a terrible burden when you were famous across multiple star systems for accidentally revolutionizing galactic warfare through pet care principles. The Battle of Kepler 442, as it was now called, had become legendary. Word had spread through the galaxy that the humans had developed some kind of revolutionary military doctrine that could defeat previously unbeatable enemies. Requests for assistance, military advice, and full-scale intervention were arriving daily. Gornax, Jake called to his faithful second-in-command, who had become something between a bodyguard, translator, and very large therapy animal. "Remind me why we didn't just accept the Galactic Federation's offer to make me supreme military dictator of everything." Because human Jake said jobs sounded boring and wanted to go home sometimes, Gornax replied in his much-improved English. He was now wearing what looked like a military uniform designed for someone with 6 limbs and an attitude problem. "Right. Good decision-making on my part." Instead of accepting unlimited power over galactic military forces, which honestly sounded like a management nightmare, Jake had negotiated what he considered a much better deal. Part-time galactic military consultant, full benefits, Earth got protected status and a seat on the Galactic Council, and he got to go home on weekends. "Besides," Jake added, "I've got a business to run." Through the window of his office, Jake could see the construction crews putting finishing touches on Martinez Interspecies Pet Care and Diplomatic Training Center. It was the galaxy's first facility designed to provide both animal care services and cross-cultural communication training, but staffed by humans who were learning to apply Jake's pet care principles to interstellar relations. "Human Jake," Gornax said, "your 3:00 appointment is here." "Which one? The delegation from the Rigel colony who want help with their pirate problem, or the group of human military officers who want to learn the Martinez method?" "Both. They arrived together, getting along very well." Jake sighed. This was the weird part of his new life. Humans were apparently natural diplomats when they applied the same patience and empathy they used with difficult animals to difficult aliens. Who knew? "Send them in." "And Gornax?" "Yes, human Jake." Stop calling me human, Jake. We've been through this. Just Jake is fine. Yes, Commander Human Jake. Jake gave up. Some battles weren't worth fighting. The afternoon was typical for his new life, consulting on military problems that boiled down to treat your soldiers like valuable creatures instead of disposable resources, mediating diplomatic disputes that could be solved with basic communication skills, and training the next generation of human-alien relations specialists. The key to interspecies diplomacy, Jake explained to a group of eager human trainees, is the same as the key to animal care. Listen to what they're trying to communicate, figure out what they actually need, and treat them with respect even when they're being difficult. But what if they're hostile? Asked Maria Santos, a former Marine who'd volunteered for the diplomatic corps. Then you figure out why they're hostile and address the underlying problem. Most aggressive behavior comes from fear, stress, or unmet needs. Fix those issues, and the aggression usually goes away. After the trainees left, Jake found himself alone in his office with Gornax, looking out at the bustling activity of the center. Humans and aliens worked side by side, sharing knowledge and building relationships that would have been impossible a year ago. Gornax, Jake said thoughtfully, do you ever think about how weird this all is? A year ago, I was unemployed and living in my mom's basement. Now I'm apparently the galaxy's leading expert on everything. Human Jake, not expert on everything, Gornax replied seriously. Just expert on caring. Very rare skill in galaxy. Jake considered this. Maybe that was the real lesson here. The galaxy was full of intelligent, powerful, technologically advanced civilizations, but somehow they'd all forgotten the basic principles of taking care of each other. It had taken an unemployed pet store clerk to remind them that whether you were dealing with an injured iguana or a demoralized army, the fundamental approach was the same: pay attention, care about the outcome, and treat every creature with dignity. You know what the best part is? Jake said, grinning at his alien friend. I still get to work with animals. They're just bigger now, and some of them have spaceships. As if on cue, a group of young Korthak warriors walked past his window, following a human instructor who was teaching them advanced tactical formations using techniques adapted from dog training. The aliens were completely absorbed in the lesson, taking notes and asking questions with the enthusiasm of students who'd finally found a teacher who made sense. Jake Martinez, former minimum-wage pet store employee, current Supreme Battle Commander of Galactic Defense, and full-time proof that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor, leaned back in his chair and smiled. Best job ever, he said. Outside, construction continued on the new dormitories that would house the first class of the Interspecies Relations Academy. Earth's first export to the galaxy wasn't technology or resources. It was the radical idea that taking care of each other was actually a pretty good foundation for civilization. And it all started because one unemployed human decided to share his lunch with a wounded alien in the woods. The galaxy, Jake reflected, was a very strange place. But it was home now, and like any good pet owner, he was going to take care of it.